So I wanted to take a look at some of the projects that I worked on to learn some of the skills that I did this last year. I was then able to apply those skills this past January when I joined the Pirate Software Game Jam, which met a bunch of really cool game devs. We played each other's games, and I was able to develop all these skills while maintaining a full-time job, working with my music, um, doing a bunch of other side projects, and just maintaining my social relationships. So, just proof that you don't have to be a hermit to be a dev. So, the first thing that I did whenever I was starting to learn Godot was look up tutorials and figure out just how does this engine work exactly. I know the basics of coding, and you can kind of apply that anywhere, but we needed to dig in and see what kind of objects and how Godot does things. So the first project I did was just a little 2D platformer, and with that I was able to start understanding what the different node types do. I built a state machine based off a few different tutorials, so that ran um, how the character works and how the enemies kind of interact with the character. Um, we figured out how collisions work. We figured out how Godot's um, signal system works. So calling down into your children and signaling back up to the parents and signaling in between nodes. We figured out how to implement some sound effects, just user input, general game logic, um, and even a little bit of UI. Next, after that, I decided to go in a completely different direction and try and do some 3D. Well, that's kind of where I feel like things started to take a left turn. So the first thing was I was overly ambitious and decided to try and create a networked game in Godot. And given everything, I feel like that actually went okay. We were able to make a really basic game with just a few cylinder players with like a little wizard staff made out of just an elongated rectangle, and then that shot out spheres. I was able to distribute that to my friends in my Discord, and they were able to connect to me and connect to each other, and we could play this game together. It was really simple. You just shot each other with little fireballs and took damage and die. It was cool. After that, I decided, hey, we'll keep looking at this 3D FPS stuff, and we went down this large rabbit hole of tutorials trying to figure that out. And eventually I decided, hey, I need to probably take a step back here because I'm kind of spinning my wheels, seeing as I don't really know all that much about game engines yet. So let's take a step back and work on something a bit simpler. And that's when I found the 20 Games Challenge. So what the 20 Games Challenge is it's basically this website that has a list of old school games that have really basic requirements about, hey, this is what makes that game a game. And it, ranges from Pong all the way to Minecraft. I didn't do all the games. I only did a select few. There's a few arcade games. I did Pong, Asteroids, Pac-Man, Super Mario Brothers. Each of those kind of had their own objective of what they are trying to teach you by doing that. So I went through a few of those just to try and have the requirements built out for me, so I didn't have to have that overhead. And instead, I just was able to focus on building a game with the engine and doing the art myself, which is the objective. So the first couple of games that I started with was Pong and Asteroids. These are really simple, pretty simple games, but they gave me just the basics of little game dev math of bouncing an object around and destroying, freeing objects, creating objects from destroyed objects like in asteroids. You destroy one big asteroid and they become multiple asteroids and they bounce together and all that stuff. And wrapping the screen for whenever the player goes through here, it comes back across like that, right? So that's kind of where those two projects taught me. And after that, I decided to make Space Invaders, which was a bit more complicated because I actually had to draw a few different enemy types, had to implement how the enemies kind of came down across the screen. They had to fit together. They weren't just like singular objects. They were actually like packed in an array like object, and they would just like go across the screen. We actually had UI elements that we had to build. We had to build an actual end state, a winning state of, hey, once all the enemies are dead, then you win, or you go to the next level, or what have you. So there was that project. And then after Space Invaders, we moved on to Pac-Man. And Pac-Man, I think, so far is really the most involved, was really the most involved project that I was trying to tackle. I had to build a tile map, which I hadn't done before. I had to build each like collision inside each of the tiles, which I hadn't done. It was just because everything else before that had just been a rectangle or a square with just boundaries at the edges, right? So we had this very unique maze that Pac-Man is known for, and some of the complications that ended up happening was I tried to pre-bake the sprite into the engine and let it create the collision object itself and create the navs and everything itself. But with that, because it's so angular, the enemies would basically get stuck in the corners. So we had to hand move all the collision shapes and make sure that all the enemies' shapes were circles, basically. So after that, it was kind of interesting because Pac-Man is known for its AI. It gives this illusion that the ghosts work together. And I'll link the document below, but it's kind of interesting. Each ghost follows its own rule set, right? And depending on where the player is and where they're headed and where the other ghosts are in relation to each other, they do different actions. So the rules themselves are actually pretty simple, but getting them to play together based on what the state is of the ghosts, what the state is of Pac-Man. Once you go super mode, the ghosts do certain things, and once they get eaten, they do certain things, right? So it was actually pretty complicated to get working, but once you got it all working, it felt really nice. And so with that project out of the way, I decided to work on Super Mario next. Super Mario was pretty interesting, not because necessarily the mechanics, but this one I really tried to organize well and keep all the objects kind of pretty basic and then implement them depending on like the type. So all the objects like the mushroom and the fire flower and the star were all just like a pickup type, and then they would implement how they would function depending on what sprite type it was or whatever. And that felt like it was a bit more convoluted to me than normal, just because I'm used to being able to build like a wrapper type or an interface type, and then I can implement those in various things. That's just not how Godot works, or I haven't found how to make Godot work that way yet. Anybody in the comments that knows, please let me know. I would love to hear how that would work or how I could structure that better. The other thing I was able to understand was how signals work in the engine, calling them from code, setting them up from code, how signals and like areas can get a reference to whatever body is like entered into them. And so like, let's say you have an area and you have the area entered signal, you have some body that goes into that area. Well, instead of, doing something, all we want to do is we just want to know if that player's in the area or that body is in the area. So you take the body and you set it into a variable on the class object, and it basically stays there until you exit. Whenever you call the exit signal, you null it out. You know that body's no longer there. So I use that for various things like, we want to go in the warp pipe. So whenever somebody presses down and they're in that state, then we can send a signal saying, hey, the player has pressed down and we want to do this action. Well, we can set on the pipe that player is there and we can send that signal. Some other things that were of note with Super Mario was I was able to use the animation player to play basically a video as you ended the level. And I kind of got to learn some of the quirks of Godot's animation player using that, because previously it had all just been for animations on like a sprite or on a certain object, not like a whole scene. So that was all interesting as well. The last couple of months that I worked in Godot before the end of the year weren't really any arcade types or any games that had been around before. I just decided, hey, I want to take a couple of ideas that I have and I want to make them from scratch and just kind of see what that process looks like. So we wrote up a quick game design document of kind of what I wanted to do. And I was just trying to keep the scope super duper low, and then just try and build it, in like a month or so. So the first thing that I built was like think like Enter the Gungeon type thing. So you go into some dungeon and you kill all the enemies, and then at the end you're able to get like a prize, and that would like increase your level or whatever it was, you would get some item. And each level would work that way until you got to the end, and then you would fight a boss. And then once you beat the boss, then you got like a special from that boss. And I didn't end up really completing it, but I was able to get like an idea of kind of how we could implement like a binary room structure, right? Each room has a link to two different nodes that you could go to. And depending on which room you took, you would go down this specific path, and it would have pre-generated room types and item types that, would basically be pseudo-randomized, up front. Until you got to the very end, which all linked to the same place. Or you could have different places if you wanted. It was relatively modular. But that's kind of what that process looked like. And it was really interesting seeing kind of how a service-like approach or a generic-like approach instead of trying to handcraft each room would look like. Then the last game that I did before the end of 23 was like a little robot prototype top-down shooter thing where you played as a little robot trying to escape someplace. And the gameplay loop was you had a certain amount of ammo that you could spend, which was what I called energy, and you had a certain amount of, and the way to regenerate that energy was by blocking projectiles with your shield. The shield also had a recharge rate too, right? You couldn't just infinitely run the shield. That would be kind of broken. But the catch was you needed to match the projectile type to the shield type to succeed. So you couldn't just do any projectile fits any shield. It had a little bit of some play there. And so you really needed to use the shield mechanic in order to progress, or else you just run out of ammo. I kind of felt like that was a bit slow, so we added a tower, and this tower would basically recharge the robot's ammo until the ammo or the charge on the tower just depleted, and then it wouldn't work anymore, right? So it was kind of an interesting system, and with that one I was able to learn a lot around creating my own AI, how I would like detect players, and kind of like, we had a charging enemy. We had this enemy that would kind of like evade and like shoot 3 bullets at you and kind of like rotate around you and things like that. So it was also a really good exercise to just build your own AI, build your own system. So the last project that I worked on was at the beginning of 24 when I joined Pirate Software's Game Jam. And that was just a really cool experience because I decided to build everything from scratch by myself, just to see kind of how the whole thing would go together in a really short amount of time. So what I ended up building, I felt pretty proud of myself. I learned more about creating animations. I learned more about shaders. I learned more about like time management in general. I basically had a spreadsheet of I need to do game dev, like get all the main mechanics done in like 3 days. I need to do all the art in like 2 days. I need to do the sound these days. I need to do polish these days. I need to do level design, these days. So that was really an important piece of making this game. The other part that I really enjoyed, and I think in the future I might just really want to join a team and be the sound guy for it, was doing the sound. I did all the sound from scratch, and synthing everything out, building the tracks, figuring out what file format they needed to be in for Godot to use each thing properly. So that was really cool. So yeah, we learned a lot about that. We learned how to deploy that out to itch, and we met a lot of good, cool people in Pirate Software Discord. And I think a lot of those people are, I guess, acquaintances now or whatever. But yeah, I think I might do another video on that game and kind of do like a deeper dive into it. But that project is actually, based on the feedback that I've gotten, I kind of changed a bunch of things around, and the feedback was relatively positive, which was super cool to see. I mean, first game that people are playing that I've made with the skills that I've been able to acquire over the last year, feels really nice. So now it's just been, learning how to refactor all that code, because Game Jam code is never really that good. And I'm also just really learning still how to leverage the game engine to its full potential. But yeah, we've learned a lot over like the past year. So, I mean, I think looking back at this last year, I've learned a ton. And I think one of the most important things that I've learned is patience and grace for myself, as well as just other game devs in general. Making games is like a difficult thing, and you're not going to be able to learn all the things in one go. That's just not how it's going to work. If you do somehow, please let me know. That would be great. I want to know your secrets. But that's just not how learning skills works. It just takes a lot of time and takes a little bit of effort. And I think the other thing that I learned is that I can make a game. I can build stuff. And, I think I've always known that. I mean, I make music, and I build software professionally. But, I think games has always been this magical thing that we kind of hold up on this pedestal. And it's really, whenever you break down all the pieces, it's pretty simple. It's whenever you put all those things together that it's a pretty complex thing. So, I will just say that, you don't have to be an amazing programmer. You don't have to be an amazing artist. You don't have to be a musical genius to contribute to the game dev community. All you need to do is tell yourself that you can do it, and then just go put in the work. And, over the course of a year, or, shorter, like a month, or even a week, you can see how much you can grow in that time. So, I guess just my advice is somebody that's just starting out on this journey. If you want to do this, go do it. And whenever you're doing it, don't compare yourself to anybody, because, that's just not really worth anything. The only person you can compare yourself to is yourself. So take the time, learn what you can, build what you want. Cheers.